Your world is only as small as you make it. Gabriel Union.
In order for us to be a part of a world where not only my children who are small and other future generations are feeling safe, we have to invest in each other. And so I think of diplomacy and the relationship building part of it as a continuous project, and a continuous project that is necessary for America, the Project America, to continue in a meaningful way. And so if we want the safety and security on our own shores, we must invest in each other.
Raised in a Ghanaian-American household, Katherine Ntiamoah's parents instilled within her the idea that her only limits would be self-imposed. She took that to heart and has been expanding her limits throughout her life, with Americorps, then the U.S. State Department as a diplomat, and now at Indiana University's prestigious Hamilton-Lugar School of Global and International Studies, where she seeks to break down the limitations of the next generation of global leaders. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft
Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful stories.
I was born in the Chicago area. I was raised in Northwest Indiana, an area that we like to call the region. It is an area that feels more like the Chicago suburbs than it does the rest of Indiana. I grew up in a deeply Ghanaian community where my parents are from. I grew up listening to Ghanaian music, and my dad also loved jazz. So I grew up in just a house that was just full of music and full of Ghanaian culture. And then my parents also just loved traveling. So I have lots of times when I think about when I was a young person, just growing up, just traveling and playing in the Amsterdam airport as we waited for our layover to go to Accra, Ghana, or going to the UK to visit aunts, and just traveling in the Midwest and also Canada to visit family and friends. They were also part of this larger Ghanaian diaspora. So life in my house was just full of constant noise and stories and people and community. So it was a really great childhood. But when I moved to Indiana, I think that was the first time that I had felt like the other. When we moved to Indiana, there was only maybe 3 other African families that were in our area. I remember vividly getting on the bus to go to my new school when we moved to Indiana. And the only people that looked like me and my siblings were members of my family. And so it was such a huge culture shock. And I think that was the first time that I'd really internalized what it meant to be Black, to be other, to feel like how I had been raised was different, because I'd never felt like that before. Growing up and eating fufu for dinner, or eating like okra and light soup for lunch was just natural. And when I saw that kids were just eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and Lunchables, I was like, I want to also feel normal like that. And so I think that was the first time I'd felt like another. And I remember going into social studies or world studies, I think that's what we had. And we were talking about the map of Africa, and the map was looked very normal and normal to me. But there was a kid who had seen the country of Niger and mispronounced it with a hard ER and thought that was so funny. And that was the first time me hearing a derogatory, being called or hearing a derogatory word for a Black person in a public space, because I'd always seen and heard African culture, Black culture as exalted, as interesting, as not as derogatory. And so it was very challenging, I think, when we moved to Indiana to really feel like the other. I mean, luckily, my parents had raised us to have really high self-esteem and really to internalize a lot of good about the way we were raised and the color of our skin and the texture of our hair. But it was hard because it wasn't the majority. It was no longer the center of my world. And so it took a lot. I think it's still very challenging to think about the way that we grew up. When I think about the way that I was able to overcome that feeling, I can remember my parents being very intentional about making sure that every summer or every break that we had, going to go and see cousins and traveling to the continent and going to the south side of Chicago and ensuring that we were exposed to culture, taking us to plays, taking us to events and things so that we felt like there was a space where we could feel comfortable, where we could feel like the way that we were raised and the languages that we spoke and the way that we dressed was normalized, and we internalized that. I think that my parents, the way that they raised me and my siblings was that if you wanted to do something and you wanted to try something, the only limit was yourself. And I just automatically assumed that I was going to go to college, that I was going to get a master's degree, that I was going to do what I wanted to do. I just needed to figure out how to do it. I don't know so much if it was the American dream. I think it was just a natural expectation of African immigrants who had come from families that were highly educated and wanted to continue that. And I think America was just an extension and an opportunity for the next generation of our family to continue doing and living the life that they wanted for their children. Like that intentionality really, I think, helped shape the person I am today and then ultimately the career that I've had. I was cleaning my childhood room a couple of years ago and I found a document. It was like a little storybook, a picture book, and it was about what I wanted to do when I grew up, and it said ambassador on it. I think it was like second grade that I had written it. I think I just heard so many stories of like embassies and visa interviews and what it was like to immigrate. Just all of the information that I had been exposed to. I guess at an early age, I was just like, I want to be an ambassador. I kind of know what it is. I know that you're a representative and you're someone that's important and you're overseas and you're working in this big, important building that makes all these big, important decisions. And so that was the trajectory that I had put myself on. And anytime that I could learn a world map, learn about a new country, learn about a new culture, I would do it. When I went to Indiana University as an undergrad, I actually declared being a journalism major. I thought maybe I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. I wanted to do something with international reporting. But my sophomore year, I decided to live in a dorm for people who were interested in international affairs. And we all had to take 3 of the same classes. And those 3 classes were the beginning of the International Affairs and International Studies degree. That's when I decided I wanted to go back onto the path of becoming and working in international affairs exclusively. I went to study abroad at the University of Ghana. I did a program that put me in Washington, D.C. for a semester, working at the State Department. And that's what renewed my interest in diplomacy again. And my job was to ensure that the internship experience for all 300 plus interns at the State Department that semester was robust and interesting, and that they were exposed to all of the different parts of what the State Department did as a whole. And so through that job, I was able to talk to ambassadors, to deputy assistant secretaries, to assistant secretaries, to even the Secretary of State. I did want to figure out, like, what was diplomacy actually like? What was it actually like working at an embassy? So I went to my supervisor and I said, I really want to see what it's like to work at an embassy before I start and take the oral assessment. She said, well, are you interested in going to Kinshasa, Congo? And I said, yes. That summer, I worked in Kinshasa in the public affairs section. At that time, they didn't have enough officers to actually staff the embassy. So I was doing a lot more than I think an intern would typically do. And that's when I knew that I was like, this is the job for me.
When was the first time when you saw
maybe the work of the public affairs section or the ambassador or whoever, where it was really having an impact on people's lives in that country?
I think my first experience was working in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. I remember crossing the border because I drove from Washington, D.C. to Ciudad Juarez, Mexico to start my assignment. And when I crossed into that city, because it looked so different, like visually different from the area that I grew up, which was really green, and we were just very obsessed with having nice lawns. Like that was the pride of your of your home, was to have a nice green lawn with nice lush green trees. And so when I crossed into Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, which is a desert, I just was in such shock of where I was going. Juarenses are just such deeply nice people who want to ensure that you have a good experience and that you understand Mexican culture and what it's like to live a life where you're living on both sides of the border. As I slowly got acclimated to living in a place that was challenging because they were going through some serious security challenges, there was large rates of femicide. There was the narco trafficking that was on the rise and all of the associated violence that came with it. But there are also people who were just trying to live life on both sides of the border. And so that meant just facilitating legitimate immigration and travel so that people could continue to grow their businesses, to visit their families, to ensure that this billion-dollar industries that were proliferating on the U.S.-Mexico border could continue. Once a month, I would do radio, I would do newspaper, and I would do in-person outreach with one other colleague. And I remember the first time that we had done a Facebook chat, because it was just as Facebook was really starting to be used as a tool of diplomacy. And we did a chat on student visas. And we had 10,000 people show up. I could not believe that there were that many people that were interested in understanding the visa process. And so every month, me and another colleague would figure out creative ways to be able to help people understand how to facilitate legitimate travel between the United States and Mexico. And it was just so interesting to be able to help people in this very specific and meaningful way, because that meant that people's business were going to continue to grow. People would be able to study and continue the careers that they wanted to grow into. That people would be able to see their grandmother and their grandfather, that people would be able to get married, that they would be able to bring their children back to the United States. And so I think that was my first time being okay, this job is really impactful. This job is necessary. But I was doing it in a place that I think most people, if you're not from that region of the United States, you don't really think about. But Ciudad Juarez, you could see every time I crossed the border, these 15 or 20 lanes of cars of people just coming in and out, in and out, in and out.
We hear a lot about immigration, and we hear a lot about, what I would say are very oversimplified messages about immigration. But having lived on a border, as you described, where there are just rows and rows and rows of cars every single day going back and forth, what would you say to someone in Middle America who maybe doesn't see it up close about why it's important for both sides?
To understand the U.S.-Mexico border, you really have to go and see it. But it's also really apparent in everything that we do, things that we eat, the food that we eat, the appliances that are used in our homes, the clothing that we wear in our bodies. I mean, it's every time I buy something at the store, I like to look and see where its origin is. And I always, every time I see an appliance that I know was made on both sides of the border, because sometimes there's pieces of equipment that will go from Mexico to the U.S., Mexico to the U.S., Mexico to the U.S. And it's so interesting to see how one piece of equipment can be made by both sides of the border, coming back and forth, back and forth. So I always like to tell people that even if you don't understand the migration challenges that the U.S. and many countries are going through, just look at the tag on your shirt, look at the appliance and see where it's made. I mean, those things are only made because of legitimate immigration, because of legitimate trade, and those decisions are made sometimes by U.S. diplomats and the U.S. government, and it's a whole ecosystem that I hope they will realize that most things, if you want access to these markets, if you want access to goods, then you have to figure out a way for all of us to work in this larger ecosystem. And that can only sometimes happen with immigration and with our relationship with other countries. And it's so interesting, especially when I sit here in Indiana. Even in a small town in Indiana, it's such an international city, and there's so many different components and people, whole cities that are propped up because of immigration. And I like to remind people when I hear negative stories about migration or immigration or migrants, that some of these cities and some of these things that we do every day and the things that we touch and the things that we consume are thanks to immigration. The reason that I am here today is because my parents took a chance on applying to come to the United States to live and to work and to contribute to American society in a really meaningful way. And my parents both decided to dedicate their lives to public service. My father worked as a CFO for non-governmental organizations for the majority of his career. My mother still works and has worked as a social worker and is now a vice president at Catholic Charities, and she has worked on chronic homelessness in and around the Chicago area for the majority of her 30-plus year career. And then me, I decided to dedicate my life to public service. So I say that as an example that there are those who want to live lives that are meaningful in places of opportunity like the United States and contribute to the communities where they live and work in a meaningful way. One of my favorite programs that I ever worked on was in Cotonou, Benin. I had just started my assignment as the public affairs officer and embassy spokesperson. And the movie The Woman King had just come out, and it was about Beninese women warriors. Benin is a country that is known around the world as having this contingent of women military that was the first in the world. Benin at the time had started to think about its cultural identity and its national identity, and they started to center it around this woman warriors. And so I thought that would be an interesting way to advance some of our U.S. foreign policy goals. So we started having conversations in the embassy about what would it look like to bridge U.S. culture through film, this American film that had been made about Beninese culture and society, with some of our U.S. foreign policy goals. So that was, at the time, Women, Peace, and Security, that initiative where we were talking about ways that women were contributing to peace and security around the world and ways that we could increase that. Also, by helping Benin to diversify its economy so that it could continue to be an economic partner of the United States. And then also ways that we would be able to use culture and film to help Benin grow its film industry. I invited the director of the film to come to Benin. We created a whole week where we were going all around Benin, talking to civil society, talking to the Beninese government, talking to youth. We talked to Beninese military about increasing women's participation in the military armed forces and in leadership positions. And it was an opportunity for us to grow our relationship in a really deep and meaningful way, but by using one of our most powerful SoftPower tools, which was film.
I can hear every word that you're saying, and I understand it. But let's break that down a little bit.
Sure.
Women, peace, and security is a part of it. Economic growth is a part of it. The film industry, which leads to tourism and better prosperity in country. And then there are also ripple effects from these kinds of programs that go on and on and on. What is it about a cultural program like that benefits everyone?
When you think about diplomacy, you're thinking about two government officials just sitting in a room trying to hash out a foreign policy challenge or a way to advance, economic security or, physical security of a country. But sometimes the best way is to invite a third party that is a better messenger than a U.S. government official ever could be. by working with a film director to talk about some of these really hard and challenging issues that the U.S. government hadn't advanced anything on, really was a helpful way to be able to talk to the Beninese government and expand upon issues that were challenging for us to talk about government to government. And so they were more willing to chat with a director about ways that they could expand their film industry. Youth were more excited to talk about these really famous people, about the challenges that they had and what youth unemployment was looking like and ways that they could take and think about entrepreneurship. Military officials, they were more interested in talking to a film director about the challenges of women working in these leadership roles in a really pivotal moment in Beninese security, because it meant that they could think about it more creatively. So sometimes I think soft power and diplomacy helps to actually move things forward in a more meaningful way rather than using traditional diplomacy. I'm always an advocate for soft power and for cultural diplomacy and for exchange programs where we're actually putting people in the room rather than just sending a document or having an official meeting or sending a press release, because those touch points where you are thinking about a relationship in a different way is more meaningful. And I think diplomacy at the heart of it is people. It's relationship building. It's looking for moments where people are thinking about a subject or a person or a country in a deeper and more meaningful way, because relationships are what helps grow foreign policy. It's not those official communiques.
That's so funny, because I was just going to follow up and I was going to ask you, thinking about your career, if I say people to people, what comes to mind?
Yeah, people to people. I mean, for example, like in Brunei, one of the programs I think that we worked on together that was really interesting and I think really helped to move our relationship forward was a program called the Academy for Women Entrepreneurs. It's a program that I've worked on in many countries around the world, but in Brunei, I think it was a really important program to our relationship because it was a really tangible way that we were able to assist Brunei in expanding entrepreneurship opportunities and ways for them to diversify their economy in a more meaningful way, utilizing American entrepreneurship lessons and skill building. Academy for Women Entrepreneurs was a program where women who were looking to grow their businesses would spend a couple of months together as a cohort doing these classes that were created by an American university about entrepreneurship, about growing their businesses, lessons learned, best practices. They would get mentorship opportunities, and then they would compete for seed funding to grow their businesses. The Bruneian government really appreciated this program because it helped with youth unemployment. It was a really tangible way for them to see themselves as a greater part of the economic ecosystem globally. And we were able to figure out ways to connect with youth in a more meaningful way as well, and kind of understand the bigger picture of what was going economically in Brunei, because it was a relationship that we wanted to grow economically, and it was a relationship that we wanted to continue growing. So it was a fun program. It was an interesting program, and it really was one that I think is deeply meaningful to me, because I was able to get to know Brunei and society in a more deep and meaningful way. As an American diplomat, you always want to ensure that you're understanding the culture that you're operating in, because that's the way that you are able to actually be effective and being able to figure out where are the ways that we can grow together, where are the ways that we can advance whatever foreign policy that we're trying to advance.
Here's some trivia for you. I named that program.
Oh, amazing. When you're trying to grow a relationship long-term, there's nothing like having an in-person, sustained relationship through these exchange programs. There is nothing like being able to bring people together who don't think that they will have any type of meaningful connection, or that they think that the cultural differences are just too vast and too wide. And after a couple of weeks or days of knowing each other, they are laughing, they are sharing stories, they're sharing best practices, they are keeping that experience as part of their memory so that when they think about the U.S. government, when they think about the U.S. as a whole, they're thinking about and reflecting on the experiences that they had in this exchange program. For example, like we would send youth from Brunei to sometimes to Middle America, and they would come back after a couple of weeks and say, you know, it's funny, we ate the same food. This little town reminded me of the small town that I grew up in. We are now going to be working on a project together. I've now found a manufacturer for this piece of this very specific project or this very specific item that I'm starting to develop in the United States. Those were the deep, meaningful exchange programs. And then it created a whole ecosystem of people who were connected to the United States in some meaningful way. And eventually they'd become the leaders of their country. So these programs, I think, were kind of like a long game. I think the most impactful moment in my diplomatic career was my assignment at the U.S. mission to the European Union in Brussels. I was there during the Brussels attacks. For some reason, the day of the attacks, I was one of the first American officers in the building, and being called to come down to the consular section, because at that time I was working as a deputy spokesperson. When there's an attack where there could be Americans involved, everyone becomes a consular officer. So that means everybody has to assist so that the most amount of Americans who are impacted can be helped as possible. And so going down there after those attacks for weeks on end, being able to ensure that Americans had as much information as possible about how to find their loved ones, how to get their passports replaced, where to locate their family members who were sometimes in Belgian hospitals and they didn't know where they were, being able to update Washington, D.C. on the status of the aftermath of the attacks, and then eventually being able to build out some public diplomacy programming on violent extremism in the latter half of that assignment really helped me to figure out ways that public diplomacy and those kind of programs, and then also just diplomacy as a whole, works to not only help American citizens, but also the safety and the security of the United States and the countries that we're posted to in general. That terrorist attack really, I think, changed my life and my approach to public diplomacy work in general, because when you survive living through a terrorist attack, you no longer think that safety and security are given. You realize that in order for the United States, and I think more specifically just living in a country overseas, you have to be part of a community and you have to contribute to that community time and time again, and you have to invest in it. I think about that time in my life a lot.
So let's say that you are getting on an elevator with a student and they have just read the New York Times article about how demoralized diplomats are, which came out today, unfortunately.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
And they are questioning their choice. They wanted to be a Foreign Service officer. You've got like 12 floors to convince them otherwise. What do you tell them?
I get this question a lot, actually. I've been in this job since August 1st, so I've been in the job for about 4 months. And I hold office hours regularly for students. I think I have 4 appointments today, actually, with students. And most of them come to me because they're interested in careers in diplomacy, but they're also just interested in just figuring out how they can utilize their degree in international affairs. I oftentimes tell them that during my career, I served under 4 presidents, 6 secretaries of state, and I served with all the TDYs, 11 diplomatic assignments. And so I tell them that this job is not for the faint of heart, but it is for those whose hearts are in public service. So if you want to do this job, you have to be deeply committed to ensuring the safety and security of every American, whether you agree with them politically or not. Your job is to ensure that America, that Project America can continue, that we have friends and allies around the world. Your interest, your ability to learn other languages, your interest in other people and cultures and relationships is valued, is necessary. And that America, while it's going through ebbs and flows where you may agree or disagree with our U.S. foreign policy approach, your expertise, your interest, your love of the world is needed. It's necessary. You should not let this moment deter you. America has been in existence for 249 years, and it will continue to exist. And we need your voice. The best diplomats are from the Midwest. We can talk to a wall. If you can talk to anybody. You can be a successful diplomat. And we need you. We want you. That's the only way that this country will continue, is if we have relationships with others. And I know that you can do it well. So take the test now. Keep taking it. Keep your interest in international affairs and keeping interested in public service.
Nice. Well, that's why you're in the job. And as a fellow Midwesterner, amen. Well, that means we're coming to the end of the show, but I don't want to finish before I give Katherine the chance to answer to our dubious Aunt Deb.
Especially in these times, I'm sorry, but I need to care more about my own country first.
First of all, I don't know if I would have an aunt like that, because I have such an international international family. But I always tell people, if there are those who are not interested in engaging with the world, why can't we do both things at the same time? Why can't we engage with the rest of the world, because we're part of this larger ecosystem and this larger global family, and also care about what's going on in the United States? The foreign affairs budget, it floats between 1 and 1.5% of our total federal budget. We're doing a lot with nothing to engage with those overseas. And so in order for the United States to continue being safer, secure, and more prosperous, we need to continue to engage with others. We need the markets. We need the exchange of information, the exchange of ideas. We can no longer just go it alone. We need to be able to continue to interact with others in a meaningful way. If you like the clothes that you wear, if you like the things that you have access to, it's because we're engaging with those overseas. None of these things are made in a vacuum. None of the things that we do are in a vacuum. And if we want to continue to be successful, and we want our countries to grow, if we want the rest of America to grow, if we want access to information and people and things and places, we need to continue to interact with the rest of the world. That investment overseas is also an investment here in the United States.
Katherine Ntiamoah is the Director of Policy Engagement and Strategic Partnerships at Indiana University's Hamilton-Lugar School of Global and International Studies. She has nearly 2 decades in diplomatic and public service. She has led strategic communications and public engagement at U.S. embassies in Brunei, Benin, Ghana, Singapore, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, with additional assignments in Washington, D.C., Belgium, Mexico, and Pakistan. Her work is focused on countering disinformation, empowering civil society, and expanding access through education and economic initiatives. Earlier in her career, she served with Americorps and held advocacy roles with the Livingston Group and the U.S. House of Representatives. She's an editorial board member of the Foreign Service Journal and serves as co-chair of the Global Migration Working Group at Women of Color Advancing Peace, Security, and Conflict Transformation. Her Substack, called Still I Notice Everything, explores power, language, and culture through the lens of diplomacy and daily life. You can find the link at softpowerfulstories.org. thank you so much for listening. If you haven't liked us, followed us, left a good review, now is the time to do that, and we thank you. For more information on the show, to see pictures of the guests, to get in touch with us, check out softpowerfulstories.org. Special thanks to my friend Kathy Zilski for her work as dubious Aunt Deb, who she is, of course, nothing like. My name is Christopher Wurst. I'm the host and creator of Soft Powerful Stories. Until next time.